On behalf of our host for this webinar, SMB Interim Management, thanks for joining us and greetings to all. Good morning to those joining us in the Americas, good afternoon to Europe, and good late evening to those joining us from the Asia Pacific region. I am Don Belinsky, Managing Partner of SMB, and I'll act as your moderator today. By way of a bit of background on SMB, we work primarily with small and medium-sized businesses to help solve complex, time-sensitive, transitional operating problems. SMB does this through the engagement of senior operating executives from our portfolio of over 1,000. They are matched to specific client engagements to engage quickly, help solve the challenge, and exit upon completion. Now, during the COVID-19 business interruption, we have had numerous conversations with clients and other business leaders about the restart process. While there certainly is a ponderance of optimism, we sense an equal amount of anxiety and uncertainty. These conversations gave birth to the idea of a series of webinars focused on the restart process. Business leaders sharing knowledge, experience, and insight with the hope of a faster and better restart. Last month, our initial webinar focused on the U.S. CARES Act and potential follow-on legislation. Today, I'm very excited to introduce a panel discussion with the theme, The New Normal, Real and Anticipated Changes Post-Reopening and Lessons Learned. Our panelists today are from global organizations and as such have a bit of a rear view mirror in terms of businesses that are weeks down the restart runway. But of course, their principal focus is on today and the future. The panelists are Sharon Lai, Chief People Officer, Lexel Asia, George Calvert, Chief Supply Chain Officer, Amway, and CK Lai, Director and Principal Partner of Clausen Associates. In terms of format, we'll begin with a 30 to 40 minute discussion with our panelists and then respond to any questions that you may have. While most of you are probably Zoom experts at this point in time, just as a reminder, the Q&A link can be found on the bottom of your screen if you're using a PC and the top of your screen on tablets. And just as Zoom has made it a little bit extra tricky, you may need to mouse over your screen to make the Q&A icon appear. Now, to kick this off, I'm going to ask each panelist to describe their business, their role, and general background first on the planning process for the restart. Now, of interest to me and perhaps the participants might be questions such as who had primary responsibility, who was involved in the planning process, were any external resources used? But I'll allow you guys to frame this in any way you seem appropriate relative to the planning process. We're going to start with Sharon Lai. Sharon is Chief People Officer, Lexel Asia. Sharon brings over 17 years of HR experience from consulting and in-house roles in Europe, Asia, and Australia, working for leading global corporations, including Mandela's, General Electric, and Mercer. Sharon, thank you so much for participating, and added thanks for starting this at 10 p.m. Singapore time. Sharon, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Don. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I'll explain a little bit about Lexel to start with. Lexel is a maker of pioneering water and housing products. We are a 16 billion revenue company headquartered out of Tokyo. I myself am based in Singapore, and actually I cover both Asia and Africa. We have a reasonable coverage across Americas, Asia Pacific, Greater China, Europe, and the Middle East. You may be familiar with some of our brands like American Standard, Grohe, and then in Japan, Inex and Tostem. So that's just a little bit about the company. I'm very pleased to be here today to share whatever insights we have. It's obviously been quite a volatile last few weeks, and I think we're happy to share. It's been a learning curve for all of us. So anything that we can share from the Asia perspective, happy to do so today.
Terrific. Can you just give us a little bit in terms of the planning process? Who from your side was really heading this up, and how did it go? Who was involved? External resources, or anything else that you can help us relative to how the planning process went?
Sure. I think at Lixil, I would have loved to say that this was, well planned, well thought out. But I think, as we all know, given how the crisis hit and in all the different locations at slightly different times, I think we scrambled, a lot. I think that's the honest truth. Having said that, where we quickly got to grips was what the priority was. And when we put employees' welfare, as the top priority, then it actually made all the other decisioning, much easier. And in terms of who was involved, I would say, strategically from the top down, certainly from our CEO, Kinya Seto, and then very quickly from an operational perspective, because of course, a lot of this had to be operationalized very, very quickly, down to the last employee. It was really a cross-functional team headed by HR, legal, as well as operations. But to be fair, everyone chipped in, any amount of time and resources they could. So in terms of external resources, we do use for information, and because the news, kept piling up, it was impossible, I think, sometimes to understand how quickly things were moving. We were looking at the news first thing in the morning, looking at it last thing at night, trying to catch some shut-eye and just to keep pace with what was happening in the different locations. So we did use an external vendor called the Asia Group, which is a group based in Washington, to give us policy guidance and analysis, really, of all the information that was coming in.
Good.
That was it.
Thanks, Sharon. And I have to comment on your background. You're either in your bathroom or that's a Lexel product display.
It is a Lexel product display. I find it very calming, and so this is something that I use a lot.
Terrific. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce George Calvert. George is the Chief Supply Chain Officer of Amway. George is responsible for, and this is a list here, global supply chain operations, manufacturing, warehousing, distribution, demand planning, purchasing, contract sales, global trade, facilities, engineering, quality assurance, control, and all farming operations. George, I'm not sure what else is left at Amway, but George, thank you so much for joining us. I think you're joining us from North America?
I am, Dom. I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and enjoying a little bit of summer. We get about 6 weeks of summer up here. So fascinating to hear Sharon's comments. And I think one of the things that you have to be transparent about is that we all thought we had a good idea of what was coming. And of course, we were all either naive, stupid, or just didn't have the right information, because unfortunately, we've had to teach and learn constantly in this one. I'll just share some of our background and some of the things some of the challenges that we faced. I'm going to take a little narrower than the broader company and talk about the supply chain, because that's probably one of the things that has been the most challenged in all of these settings, particularly those supply chains that have really global nature. Certainly there's a lot of supply chains. For example, a U.S.-based supply chain, having U.S. suppliers, tier 1, tier 2. But for a company like Amway, where we're taking raw materials out of Mexico and bringing them to the United States and shipping them to China, or reversing that flow, that can be quite a challenge. So Amway is an $8 billion company. We're in 80 countries around the globe. Our top countries in markets and revenue: China, U.S., Japan, Korea. Thailand. We used to be thought of as a U.S. soap company. Now we're really an Asian wellness and beauty company. Nutritional supplements are our biggest business. Beauty, personal care, home care, water and air treatment systems, cookware. So a huge variety of product types. And interestingly enough, from a supply chain, Don, you mentioned it. We have a very unique aspect to our supply chain, in that we go all the way back up the supply chain. We have 6,000 acres of organic farms. We process intermediates. We make finished goods in all categories, whether that's nutrition, home care, personal care. We even assemble water and air treatment systems. We have finished good manufacturing in the U.S., China, India, Vietnam, and intermediate processing in Brazil and Mexico. We flat out deliver also 90 million orders a year. So, every aspect of the supply chain. So the rolling aspect of this COVID pandemic on supply chains and markets around the world has been probably our biggest learning, and the thing that we should have anticipated better. And when you talk about that rolling aspect, the challenges have been rolling. The first challenge obviously being this huge demand spike for COVID-related SKUs. And I've talked to a lot of people around the globe, and it's not atypical to hear of a 500% demand spike that lasts for 2-3 months. And of course, if you're within lead time on some of these items, it's going to be very difficult to get those back in stock that quickly. But we're also seeing things like shaded cosmetics, which are seeing a clear drop in demand. So there's been a huge change in the mix. And then you talk about what happens in terms of supply chain challenges. You've got, Don, you wanted to say, what restart? Our restart started in January. Our restart started in January because that's when China first got hit. And that first thing that hit is they shut down the plant. Well, you can't protect the business. You're certainly protecting the employees by having them stay home, but you can't protect the business that way. So as we began to restart, we saw that, making sure that our sites were essential and that our communication with our employees and our customers was there, so they understood what was going on. Materials became second, right? You can get the materials that are in a supplier's warehouse, but then they were having troubles getting their secondary supply. So you had to very quickly look at, okay, where is my option to source some of these other materials? Frankly, I think this is going to require a whole rethink of global supply chains. I think you're going to see much more development of secondary suppliers and or regional supply bases. One of the things that we didn't anticipate was that, even getting the transportation of those goods, even if you had them, even if you could get them, getting them in the belly of planes aren't flying, ports aren't open. That was another challenge. The third challenge we hit was labor. Whether you're in the United States right now or some of these other markets, it's just hard finding people to want to go to work. One, the unemployment benefits are greater for somebody to stay home. They're making 34% more staying home than they are coming to work. And so protection of our labor force, incentives, we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but that was a big deal. And then last one, Don, and I apologize for taking so long, but the delivery side. People have gone from, we had markets that were 30% home delivery. They're now 100% home delivery. Yeah. Okay, well now all of a sudden your pick pack operations have to be, 3.5 times the speed. So getting those things up to speed quickly and ensuring that you've got all of the supply chain working together has been a huge challenge.
Great, thank you very much, George. Now let's move on to CK Lai. CK is principal partner at Kloss & Associates, a multidisciplinary consultancy that helps companies integrate technologies, ideas, and innovation into sustainable businesses. He focuses on the importance of correctly framing each of corporate culture and organizational culture to effectively drive innovation organization-wide. CK has over 35 years of management strategy and leadership experience in the industrial and service sectors in the U.S. multinationals, Asian conglomerates, and startups. CK, thank you for joining us. CK is from Singapore as well, so good late evening to you. CK offers us a unique perspective, addressing this from the consultancy side with the ability to look at this from the outside in. CK, let me turn it over to you in terms of thought process on the planning.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, I advise on a focus area on the organization's ecosystem, and that's important to look at. It was actually mentioned by Sharon and really emphasized by Doug just now. The ecosystem as relates to organization and corporate cultures. A focus is actually the relationship between the organization and the internal stakeholders in the workplace. Again, that's one of the key issues. So it's the board, the leadership, the managers, the support staff, the factory workers, a whole lot. That is actually critical because these people are actually critical to the organization. When this pandemic hit, remember it was only in one place in Wuhan, but for those who are not so sure of the geography, Wuhan happens to be the manufacturing capital for most of the electronic companies and almost everybody else. So you get hit by panic, and on the first thing you get hit with is that, can we visit the plants? The people running it are overseas. They're either stuck there or take them out. Who is going to run the plant when you are away? So there are a lot of issues that are to deal with the organization, the people, and therefore the culture. The change process, as we advise, is really usually led by the CEO or president, the regional president. But I can say that because it came so fast, the board is actually on their heels all the time, right? So it's the board asking questions and everybody's trying to find an answer. But operationally is delegated to to a team comprising normally the department heads or the area heads and the human resources. Okay. Many of the SMEs went about this without external help, except in the health and safety side of it. That's because they mostly focus on operations, restarting operations. They were in a panic mode. Still are somewhat, because not only is this a sourcing problem, it's also a marketing problem. The pandemic spread from, nobody expected the pandemic spread from here to Europe, and Europe gets a shutdown. So it's a huge impact on that. The pandemic actually hit business like a tsunami. It was very fast. It's washing over all the organizations, and the new normal has taken hold. It is engulfing the whole organization and how it does business. Exactly as my two panelists, all the whole organization is not just about health and safety. Most aspects of the SME businesses have been affected. In fact, we talk about SME businesses, but I can say that most businesses have been affected, and they are being reshaped. Businesses are being reshaped as we speak. I think most of the SMEs try to solve these problems themselves. What we advise is that it's actually better to barnstorm the business with an external experienced leader to operate in this new normal environment. Identify the blind spots, the ditches that the incumbent leaders may not have seen. We can't see everything. And there's a lot of learning to be done. To try to do it by yourself in a very short time, that would be quite a risky proposition right now. You can learn a lot faster by talking to other people. Yes.
Great, thank you very much, CK. Let's move on to the second area. This is an interesting one for me, certainly. We hear the words new normal, or the concept that business as usual will no longer exist. Do you agree, disagree? And if you agree, what do you see as the major changes going forward? And I'll let you guys, kind of cover the waterfront. One of the things that's, I think you'll talk a lot about working from home and all those kind of things. But one of the things that I find very interesting is how we might interact with customers and suppliers in the future. So leave it open to you. And Sharon, I'll ask that you start this conversation.
Thanks, Don. So actually we have a phrase, slightly different one at Lixil. We call it the next normal. We don't quite like to call it the new normal. So the next normal, sort of has a forward thinking element to it. I would say certainly from an employee perspective, which is where I spend most of my time, the first thing we thought of was, of course, safety. But then I think as the weeks, moved on, we can see that when we come back, and many of our offices and plants have restarted already, should we continue in the same way? What benefits did we gain from the lockdowns, the advances, the way that it pushed us all to work differently? We certainly don't want to lose those benefits. And that's really what we're talking about now. In concrete ways, I could say that we are looking at all our premises and our leases, and we're trying to understand how many people really do we need to come into the office. Where we might have had flexible working arrangements, we're really going to push that now because we've demonstrated that practically everyone that came into an office could work 100% efficiently from home. And if you look at locations like Japan, where we've traditionally had overtime issues, this is definitely one of the things that we want to ride out to help to change some of that culture. So if I just look at a simple project that we were looking at for our headquarters here in Singapore, we were planning to move to another site. Now we're going to stay and we're going to halve the site, because we think we can keep up to 50 to 60% of the workforce at home on a permanent basis and still be safe in the office. So I think that's one of the concrete ways. We've seen that we can communicate well, and that strangely, Zoom is a great leveler. You don't have to fly business class or economy or anything else to get to a location. Parents are able to take care of their children. I mean, we see, kids running by in the background of Zoom, and everyone understands, and the meetings continue. So we find that actually it's a great leveler in terms of participation. We don't have to think now, who should we invite? We're like, well, let's invite everyone, because everyone can make it. Short of time zones, we know where everyone is, and they can attend. So meetings have gotten actually bigger and bigger. If just looking at my own function, I might have had, senior leadership meetings. And now, partly because we want to stay connected to everyone who could potentially be isolated at home, everyone's invited to the weekly meetings. Just come and join and listen, because you could be, because we're not seeing you in the office anymore. So I think that's a very nice social change. One of the bigger changes on leadership, I think, Don, that we're going to see is it really surprised us. I think that the employees looked to us for such guidance and leadership during the crisis. I think partly it's because of the failure of various governments to provide clarity. And so I think during this crisis, actually a lot of organizations have, taken very firm steps, very concrete actions, no-fly policies, work from home policies, allowances, and just basically managing, the workforce. And I think employees have really appreciated that. We've certainly seen a huge uptick in engagement and in loyalty. People saying how much they appreciate all the things that the companies, have done, versus, I think, in their minds, what maybe governments, have failed to do. So we want to, ride that particular way forward as well.
Yeah, terrific. I love the term next normal. I'm gonna borrow that if I may.
Sure.
It's a great term. Yeah, so very interesting observations. In terms of space utilization, what the world might look like tomorrow. A lot different in terms of office space requirements, how we interact internally. The other thing I think you mentioned as well is just, the concept of Zoom. I think 3 months ago when I would mention Zoom to a lot of people, their eyes would gloss over, what's he talking about and why would you do that anyway? So the world is really, changing pretty quickly. Sharon, I know your focus is on, the employees, but I'm very curious. Have you heard anything about the interactions with customers and suppliers and how you're accommodating that in this environment?
Sure. I think we're a little bit ahead of the game on the technology side, particularly in Japan. And so where we would have, huge showrooms where people would come, that was the traditional way. People would come, we would have some fancy gadgets that would show you, this is how your bathroom might look like. If you pick these particular things, this is how you renovate your kitchen, etc. So it was a relatively simple step to then say, well, all of this is online now, because you could have done that. You would have come in and you would have, felt all the materials. And that's the thing that we perhaps cannot replicate. But everything else could be done online. So we do have a backlog of orders, coming at us now. I think that's one. I think in terms of what we might call foot soldiers, people who are, going to visit distributors, customers on site, that's been very challenging. And in locations where technology infrastructure is just poor, then those individuals have really struggled. And so then no amount of investment that we can provide, can help. They're still using text and mobile, to try and connect with customers until they can see them face to face. I have to say that in countries like Taiwan, China, Vietnam, they are already meeting face to face. There are dealer meetings, there's dealer dinners, there's, it's practically back to normal. I think obviously sometimes with face masks, I have noticed that now that they're sending photos of events without the face masks, I think they just take it off and take the photo and then everything goes back on. So it is definitely a challenge. And a lot of times we wait to see if the customer is comfortable to see us, because we could be ready to go. But if you're not in a position to have any face-to-face meetings, then we respect that and we step back.
George, talk to us about the next normal.
Yeah, so it's so interesting to hear Sharon talk about this, because many of the things that she's talking about from an office setting, I think a lot of us are experiencing, right? No one dreamed that you could be as efficient, as effective with people working from home. Just no one dreamed it, right? And in fact, we're finding quite the opposite. People are actually being very efficient, very effective. I'd say, just a couple differences for us. Our work days extended. Used to be you'd be at work at 7 o'clock and you're out of there by 5. Okay, well now you're starting at 6 a.m. And you're probably ending about 10 p.m. But you've got a couple, hour, 2 hour, 3 hour breaks in the middle of it. And you're right, if you're trying to homeschool an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old during that time, boy, that makes for an interesting day. The other one that I would say is interesting is not just who needs to return, but what jobs don't you need anymore? For example, are you going to need as many support staff? If you're going to have half the number of staff that are back in the office, do you need the number of assistants? Do you need the number of receptionists? Do you need the number of mail delivery? Even cleaning crew. right? I mean, I totally agree with Sharon. We've had a couple instances where we were talking about, moving to, larger office space. And now we're saying, no. One, we don't need as many office space, but also how do we think about that office to provide what we call gridding? Gridding to help protect and isolate, at least, the new normal until we get some vaccine or something here, is going to be that we have to have that kind of gridding. CK mentioned it. Amway is a sales marketing organization, period, right? But I'll tell you what, the most critical staff in the world are right now for Amway, it's our manufacturing and distribution employees. So we're doing everything to protect them. If you're not absolutely required to do your job in the at the manufacturing sites right now, you're not even allowed in. You have to have permission to come in. The plant managers, Don, you asked this question earlier, the plant managers are making decisions about who gets to come in and who doesn't. That means truck drivers are dropping their loads, but not allowed in the building. That means that the executives in charge of manufacturing aren't allowed to go and shake hands with people in there. I mean, you're just down to the crew leaders and plant managers running these things. The other one that I'd say is going to be really different is this regional supply. Again, I keep mentioning this. The breakdown of the global supply chain here is really evident. And what people are going to have to decide is what's the risk going forward. The risk is that you're going to put in additional secondary supply base in these markets where you might have, for example, finished good manufacturing. But that comes at a cost, right? There's going to be an economic cost to that. So how much flexibility you give yourself, how much leeway you give yourself, that's going to be something that I think is going to reshape the supply side, particularly on what I'll call secondary materials. Big changes coming on there. Then the other one, it's a simple one, and Sharon probably had this too. How do you onboard new employees when, this is easy if we know who we're talking to and dealing with, but we've got new employees coming in. How on earth do you send them a computer at their house? Do you start one by one introducing yourself to them, virtually? I mean, they're just new challenges. We have an internship program. We were going to cancel the internship program. We said, no, keep the internship program. We're going to do it virtually. You know why? Because these are the kind of people we're going to need going forward. Many more virtual people. So, I would guess, Don, at the end of this, half of the staff are going to be at home.
Interesting.
Half. Now, I take the operational staff separately than the office staff, but office staff, probably 50-50.
Yeah, very interesting observations. Thanks, George. One of the things that strikes me is the ability to, I think Sharon mentioned it, the ability to be more inclusive. Where before you had to think about who you would invite to the meeting, they had to be in that location. Now you can always err on the side of inclusivity. So, again, great comments. CK, talk to us about your perspective on the next normal.
Yes, Sharon, thank you for the correction. Very good point. It's next normal. So I'm going to try to use that because that's actually what's happening. The next normal, as we all say, is already here, but much remains unclear about what the future holds. Exactly like what George said. We may think we know what it is, but there's a lot of unknowns right now. There are market demand unknowns and supply chain unknowns. Can you hear me? Yes. But what is clear is that business will emerge into a post. Yes. But what is clear is that business will emerge into a post-crisis world with a different view of what is the normal. All right. We are talking about a fundamental change. So organizations are now in a reactive mode, and we are advising them that they should actually look post the crisis. Things will change. So there are really two choices that they face. One is to attempt to fine-tune or enhance some version of the pre-crisis or what we are managing now. Kind of like business and usual plus, The plus is the continuity planning. People talk about continuity planning. The second choice is to really reimagine your business. And that's what we encourage. Actually, Sharon talked a bit about that. George talked a lot about that. You have to reimagine your business and the organization paradigms. I always focus on the organization because, as George and Sharon said, people are the most important. How do you manage that? I'll touch into the thing that George said. How do you induct a person? You know, when you have you have really got to talk about culture, corporate culture, because that's actually the values, the beliefs, the mission, the vision, and you can't do that virtually on a Zoom or you know, you need a physical interaction. I'll get into that. So you have to imagine the business. This means that the new policies and practices will not be a temporary measure. People should not view your stuff, should not view as temporary measure. It's a fundamental change in the way the organization is going to do its business. All right. So the most important thing to keep in mind is the culture. And as much as the crisis is a shock to the business, the next normal is a shock to everyone in the organization. This was something that when it first hit, most organizations didn't really figure that out. You see, a lot of the things that came out about people starting work at 6 and 10, they came out because of flexibility. It came out from the employees, you know, not from a corporation thinking about how do we work, what liberty should we give them. People are making guesses and they're doing it. Great. For the good companies, they turn out all right. Okay, turn out actually very good. Employees are your most valuable resource. Therefore, this becomes a corporate culture and organizational culture issue. That's what we always tell organizations. It is a corporate and organizational culture issue. And the companies are undertaking a transformation journey. They have to start thinking about it and not, it goes from reactive to proactive. It is a transformation journey. So when we talk about a transformational journey, there is a need to reach out and listen to the employee needs and concerns. We shouldn't find out in retrospect. We should listen to what the issues are. For example, one of the big problems we tackle is that the noise, the interruptions at home. And we advise them to go out and put out a policy to say how we can help you have your private space, like an office. You know, what kind of expectation do we have? Whether we are sitting in pajamas at 7 o'clock in the morning, or whether, you know, there's some way we could help them. They're guessing. We have to really look at their needs, their concerns. We have to reduce their anxiety and help them transition, right? It's not just the company and your business having a shock. The employees are having a shock. You know, the unknowns of whether I'll have a job tomorrow. How should I perform? How's my colleague performing? Right now, because of the disconnect between the physical space and office where they work and the home, they cannot actually tell what is happening. A lot of guessing is happening, and you really don't want to double guessing. So in this respect, there's no one size fits all. You really have to look at as a transformation journey, who are you messaging, and what are the programs by subgroup. But the easy one is exam, non-exam, but that's too broad, you know. It is actually your factory, that's one, but it's also your support staff, your management, the leadership. Each one of them is going through a process, and we have to, the sooner we understand that and work on it, I think the better. The work from home virtual meetings is very common, as we all know. But the biggest challenge is that the pre-crisis, the organizational ecosystem has always been internally focused, right? So you go to the office, you have discussions, you go to the coffee machines or the lunch break, tea breaks, you talk to each other. Even when you're sitting in a conference room, you can be whispering to the colleague. You see, it's a culture thing. You have to understand that there is a corporate culture that's been inculcated over years, right? But when you're doing a remote thing, you don't have a chance to do that, you know. Don, you speak, George, you speak, Sharon, you speak. When your chance comes, but I have got a little thought. I want to share it with Sharon. How am I going to do that? You know, in a Zoom call, I basically then come out and say what it is. It may come out wrongly because I I didn't make some adjustments in there. I didn't know a little bit of information. So those things about culture has got to be tackled. And how do you reinforce that when you are in a work from home environment, from a physical office to now something from home? That is the bridge that I think corporations should be working at. That's what we encourage corporations to work at. The traditional internal organizing ecosystem has suffered disconnect, and we need to reconnect it to the social ecosystem now, something that's not been done before. A big issue there is working from home is actually trust. I've seen failures in trust. Bosses thinking that I want to see you every morning at 8 o'clock, you come on a Zoom call because how do I know you're working? Or how do I working your whole day? You know, there's a trust issue there. And what we want to do is to create that trust, but also reinforce passion. When people are working from home, you want them to be passionate, thinking about what the issues are, what a company is expecting you to do, what I can contribute. You really need to have the trust and the passion as part of that corporate culture thing. Interacting with customer supporters, I think I don't have a lot of experience in that. In fact, George has a lot of that. But really, I think is again the trust. You can't do supplier meetings all the time on Zoom. You need to build up the trust and you need to build up that enthusiasm. Things can go flat when it gets too business-like. And you know, in the real world, it doesn't do that. You shake hands, you find that there's a body language, you say, hey, you're being too difficult, you laugh about it, you shake hands. You don't have all that now. So you have to rebuild all that to see how you're going to put back the enthusiasm in your suppliers. Same with the customers. And to do that, there are many digital platforms. I think both Sharon and George mentioned that. I think the last point is really the trade barriers, nationalism, the objective, and George is actually quite is extremely knowledgeable on that one. It's actually, I think you would mention that is supply chain resilience you need to build. So I'll leave that to George on that one. You had looked at the inward and outward. In fact, all the companies are looking at the inward and outward supply chains carefully. Cost on the one hand, demand capacity planning on the other.
Thank you, CK. I appreciate that. In the interest of time, we've got about 15 minutes left. Let me combine the next two questions and throw them back to you guys. So, you know, the last two questions are, you know, one, talk to us about changes that you've enacted. I think you've touched on this a bit, but talk to us about changes you've enacted to enhance the health and safety of employees as well as customers and suppliers. And then the last question, so we have time for a couple of participant questions, is what went well in this process so far? I know we're at the beginning. What did you overlook? What do you need to change? What are the kind of major surprises? So if Sharon, I could turn it back to you to address those last two questions, and we'll move on.
Sure, thank you, Don. I think in terms of employee health and safety, obviously based on what we know now, social distancing and distancing in the office is what we have to adhere to. So that's a very basic one. I think the other thing we're trying to do, obviously, is working in teams. This is part of that business continuity that CK was talking about before. I think in terms of, you know, I won't go through that list because I think every corporation's probably gone through it by now, right? The distancing, the extra cleaning, the, you know, fewer people in the offices, going in teams, you know, potentially providing private transport. In some countries, we've done that instead of public transport to try and avoid public transport in certain countries and cities. So, you know, I think those are all, you know, things that are probably quite common now. I think where we need to spend more time is probably on the levels of anxiety and stress. I think when we talk about safety these days, that's probably something that needs to be more addressed, because I think everyone can come together and understand what we need to do in a crisis. But as the crisis prolongs, right, we're talking about sometime from late January to now, and we're all going into phases of different openings. I think if we have a second wave, in one or multiple locations, and we, take a step back, I think the levels of anxiety will increase, will probably double, I mean, we are communicating in a very straightforward, practical way. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. We're trying to be positive, but we're obviously also not trying to oversell it. I think if we oversell it and we have to take a step back, that's when we might lose some trust with our employees. So I think on the health and safety side, as well as on reopening and any surprises, I believe that we've always been quite conservative when we look at other organizations. But that's a path that we have taken consciously. It comes back, I think, to what CK says about culture. Other organizations may be, greater risk takers. I think as a culture, we've always been quite conservative, and we think that this is the way we go forward. So even though I think we've been surprised that actually maybe our employees are more conservative than we are. We recently opened the office in the headquarters in Tokyo, and we planned for about 20% of people to potentially come in, but we made it by invitation. We said, you can come in if you feel comfortable, and less than 10% showed up. So I think we thought people would be, I think where certain managers had said, people are tired of being at home, all the mess, all the kids, they want to come in, and that wasn't the case at all.
Great, very interesting. George, some comments relative to safety for employees, suppliers, customers, as well as how's it going? What are the surprises? What have you learned? What would you do differently?
Yeah, echoing a number of things Sharon said, we thought that there was going to be a lot more people that were going to want to come back in. And we had all sorts of reports of people saying, look, I can't work at home, blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking it's been a handful of people for us that have actually said, okay, I'm coming back in part because when they come back in, they're going to sit in their office. They're not going to walk around. They're going to have a face mask on all day long. And there's no food service. I mean, just every thing that you don't really want, right? So the reality is there was a trickle in and then kind of quickly stopped. But one of the things that again, I keep going back to these essential employees. We do have a fair number of essential employees on our site, right? So we have about 2,000 people in the U.S. alone that are manufacturing or distribution. Of those 2,000 so far, we've had 4 COVID hits. We've had 0 transmissions. In other words, 0 person to person out of our site. So we can't protect everybody from everything they're doing at home, but we can protect them once they're at work. And there's a couple key lessons for us in this one. One, everybody's talking about these pods or getting in isolation. Big lesson for us was that like an aha early on. We had these great grids set up and everything else, and we had a positive COVID hit. And we went back and said, okay, where would that person been? Well, they went through the locker room. Everybody in the whole plant went through that locker room. You can't have a grid if everybody's going through the same locker room. So you've got to do a Gemba walk on these grids. You've got to literally go through their day to think about what entrance they're going in. Is that door open or not? Do they have to open that door? Can it be automatic? Break rooms, restrooms. Restrooms, frankly, we've got those doors open now, right? And we don't want people touching those doors going in, going out, right? And furthermore, we also determined that the smaller the pod, meaning, let's just say you have 20 people in the pod versus say 10 in a pod. Sharon's point about this aspect of you're worried workers. They're worried somebody gets a positive COVID hit in that pod. You got a lot of people worried. Our first COVID hit, we sent 14 people home. 19 others didn't show up the next day. Okay, we learned. We got our COVID pods down to about 6. We had a single hit. Those 6 go home. Everybody else showed up the next day. That's a big deal because I think a lot of people are seeing, somewhere around 60% labor showing up on an everyday basis. So Gemba walk your pods, Gemba walk your isolation, and then think very carefully about making sure that those pods are as tight as can be, because it's going to help you when you do have a hit, and you will have a hit, but it's also going to help just the mental state of your workers.
Great, thank you, George. CK, to you on your comments relative to safety and any lessons learned in this relatively short time frame that we've been going through the reopening process.
Yeah, just a few. I think George, in fact, made some very important points there that I said is very important. You got to listen to employees, you got to reduce anxiety level, you got to anticipate actually what their needs are, what their concerns are. That's exactly right, okay? But if you return to the office guidelines, if I give an example on that, the office guidelines should be designed to be cautious and rigorous, but must be flexible. That's the point. It must be flexible. Take a methodical and measured approach with regular communication updates. People just need to listen to say why it is that way, not here are the rules, read it and follow it. No, it must be flexible, and you must communicate. I think that's important. What is falling short is that the culture aspects on how to build trust, passion, and enthusiasm is needed in the next normal. That's been lagging. You're not behind time doing that, because the next normal is going to continue for some time. Okay, but there must be this culture aspects on building trust, passion, and enthusiasm back for the employees, so that they feel that they are now back part of a team, working in a different way, but part of the team. And I think insufficient help has been given to the work from home members in terms of listening to them and their needs. I think that would be one of the big issues that you really got to pay attention to. You got to give them help, and not just assume that they will all come to work and they'll know what to do, or they have a quiet spot. I give them a laptop. It doesn't actually work that way. You need to be a little bit more proactive than that. Another thing that I think put on the agenda is that the corporate culture has hardly been reviewed and refined. You can't have that old corporate culture without relooking at it. Okay, I think that's the thing. But the major surprise in conclusion is that organizations have been more agile in a very short time than everybody expects. Everybody reacted. They reacted generally quite well. Businesses are running. It's just a next normal. What are you going to do?
Terrific, thank you. We got a few minutes left. Let me turn this over to kind of the Q&A from the participants, and if I ask all the panelists to unmute and jump in as you see fit. First question, kind of a simple one given some of the topics we've been talking about, but what's going to happen to the formal business greeting of the handshake? Is that dead, and what's going to replace it? Anybody jump in on that one?
Well, I don't like elbow bumps. I think that's just awkward.
I do as well.
I guess in Asia, there's a lot of nodding, and so that's a respectful way to get ahead.
George, what do you see? What do you think?
I think it's done for a while. The elbow bumps are a little weird. I mean, I got to admit, it's more of a couple football players on a pitch versus a business setting.
Mm-hmm. Any idea what's going to replace it? I mean, today when I go to greet someone, my hand goes about 12 inches out before I retract it, and then I'm kind of lost. What do you think, CK?
I think it's a bit of a laugh, but it's true. But it's actually body language at the end of the day. Okay, the handshake was a body language development. I mean, I feel awkward. Some people kick my shoes, and I find it a bit difficult to kick the shoes. Actually to do that. But what we do is that it's a smile. It's a smile and acknowledgement. Yes, they actually come out with a hand, and now I find that we don't even touch. We come with a hand. He comes out with a hand, and we smile, and that's it. That replaces handshake for the time being. It's great because it's really body language.
Good. I'll try and squeeze two more in here. A little more complex. Do you see areas of growth for hiring given the perceived outlook that certain types of supporting roles may not be needed going forward? Does the labor force need to develop new skills to meet those needs?
It is a complex question. I think, we are looking at jobs and job relevance going forward. Clearly, we know more. I think the technology department, just got a free pass now because we've seen how important it is to invest and to invest ahead of the curve. We feel we got it right for a lot of things, but could we do better? For sure. So I think any new idea now is going to be, heartily supported. But I don't think we've come to a conclusion yet on what you might scrap. I think that's still on the table.
I'm with Sharon. I mean, we keep learning in this, and every week we think we had it before, and it's too early. I would say people that have a real good technology basis are gonna thrive in this. People who can't use Zoom or Microsoft Teams are going to be in trouble. I think we're going to find new ways of using online distribution of work, though. For example, having a pool of folks that help us with things like travel, right? Why do you have to have a person at your desk doing travel for you, right? I mean, maybe that goes out to a group, and we have people situated around the world that are taking care of that when you're asleep and they're awake, right? I mean, so I think you're going to see a lot more distribution of work using technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think absolutely right. I think retraining is going to be a major initiative, I think, for most companies. I think job position losses will be maybe in the 20%, 30% range, especially if you're not in the factory environment. And it can't be helped in a way, but we don't need to take any action very quickly, but you really got to anticipate what some of these issues are and deal with it. It comes down to an organizational issue at the end, and how you communicate it to the team. Terrific,
thank you. I'm going to do one last question to try and respect the time frame for this discussion. And I apologize to the participants that we're not going to get to all the questions. A lot of them had to do with things that you guys have talked about in terms of the real estate footprint, in terms of loss of employment, the kind of discussion we were just having. Two buzzwords that I've heard you guys say a lot, and I really resonate with them, is communication. And you can't over communicate, and just continue to communicate with everybody, the inclusiveness and the trust. But last question, and a bit more complicated, and we see this in the press a lot, the concept of a rise in nationalism. Can you comment to that?
I think this is a given. I mean, I think it's not just a rise in nationalism. It's all this action and reaction. You would expect that on the supply side there's a resilience when you're sourcing, but on the marketing side, it's actually where the critical issues are. Demand capacity planning is a big issue, right? So you have to really look at a new form of collaborations, new form of partnerships. You've got to really be ahead of the curve, otherwise you'll be caught in this one. You have too many competitors coming on. They're coming from all sorts of directions, and you have uncertain market demands.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with CK. We're on the supply side. We're seeing it. I mean, people do not want to bring in goods from different markets these days. You know, whether they have it worse or better or whatever. I mean, I think it's going to, again, make it much more difficult to move goods freely around the globe going forward.
Sharon?
I think from an organization perspective, we sort of seen more benefit of the fact that we're global. So for example, when the toilet paper started running out or started becoming an issue, you know, we had a huge spike in demand in some of our bidets in the US. And so we then, you know, we resourced from a different location to meet that demand. We said, okay, Asia can wait. We're going to get more profit out of this, you know, selling it in the US. And that's what we did. And we, you know, we tell that story, you know, a few times in town halls, in meetings, to demonstrate the strength of, you know, our global team and our global decision making. Now, of course, yeah, I think we're all aware of what's happening outside, and you know, where even governments like in Japan are starting to look at, you know, how can they get partnerships outside of China, right, and how they can encourage those. So, you know, we are, you know, feeding into that, but we are trying to demonstrate that we're stronger for being global, and certainly from an employee's perspective, more stable if we can take hits in one country and benefits from another and balance it off for everyone.
Great. CK, anything to add here? We're 2 minutes into overtime.
No, I think it's fine. I think it's the thing is to stay calm. Don't make sudden decisions, but review your organization culture, your organizational issues, and review the corporate issues, because they have to change in the next normal. And it's good to relook at all those kind of issues. And when you do that, you'll find that a lot of the supply chain tariffs, those things come out. And please use an external sounding board. I think that's the best advice you can give. A lot of people, a lot of CEOs think that they know what's happening, they know what to do, but there are many things they don't actually see.
Great. Well, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it. I know that you're extraordinarily busy in your day job, so thank you for taking an hour of your time and all the prep time as well. Really appreciated it. Kind of the objective of what we were trying to do is basically share, you know, knowledge, experience, and insights. You guys have done a great job. I've picked up a couple of nuggets of wisdom at a minimum from the conversation. And what I would say to the participants, again, knowledge, experience, insight, sharing, business leaders, this is what we're trying to accomplish here. Nothing more and nothing less. If you have any ideas about what might be helpful to you and other business leaders, you know, please send me an email. Love to hear. That's actually how the theme for this particular webinar was created. It was actually from, you know, participant suggestions. So again, thank you. Have a great morning, day, evening, and great weekend. And again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Don.